how do I take my turn? Hail Sorcerers, Rude here. Welcome back to the archives for another Learn to Play video. Today we're going to be talking about the turn summary and how you take your turn in the game Sorcery Contested Realm, and then how you pass it on to your opponent. Well, thanks so much for joining. Let's get into it. Today we'll be covering the turn summary on page 16 of the Sorcery Contested Realm rulebook, as well as a reference to an advanced concept called the storyline on page 31. So you've just finished setting up the game and you're ready to contest the realm. You've decided who's going to go first, and you've drawn your opening hand. The turn summary for sorcery can be broken down into 3 phases: the start phase, the main phase, and the end phase. For the first turn of the game, the individual that is chosen to go first will not draw a card. The second player will get to choose whether to draw an atlas or a spellbook at their discretion. The first player will start by establishing their domain, and this is something that you have to do at the beginning of every sorcery game on your first turn. Here is where we tap our avatar to play our first site on the starting location. In this case, because there's a Genesis ability on my rustic village, I could choose to pay that 1 mana that it generated to play a foot soldier. Remember, mana is generated the moment your site comes into play, or if there's an additional card that provides mana when it comes in. For sites that were in play from prior turns, mana would be generated during the start phase. The start phase is the first phase of your turn, and all abilities that last until next turn now end. The start phase is broken down into 4 steps. Step 1. All of your cards that were tapped now untapped. Our sorcerer would untap. All of the sites that are in play will now provide mana for this turn. Trigger any abilities that happen at the start of the turn. And then finally, we would choose to draw 1 card from either our atlas or our spellbook. Note, this is for every turn except for the first player's first turn, which they do not draw a card. We then proceed to the main phase. The main phase is where most of Sorcery's gameplay occurs, and this is the phase that you're going to be spending most of your time in. You can order your units around, you can cast spells from a spellcaster like your avatar. You can also activate one of their abilities. For instance, the avatar has an activated ability, which is a tap ability, to draw a spell or to play or draw a site. In this case, I could choose to play this Gothic Tower, or I can draw an extra spell from either one of those spell books. Additionally, you can activate abilities of your other units. Here is where you would be engaging in combat and doing damage, which we'll cover in a future video, and casting some of those other spells, which we'll also cover in a future video as well. You can have any amount of actions occur during this phase. The most important thing is you need to have the resources to do that. As mentioned, at the beginning of the turn, you'll generate mana from each of your sites, and the threshold is something that's going to be important to casting those spells, which we'll talk about in our next Learn to Play video. It's important to note that there's no specific order that you have to take your actions in. For instance, you could choose to attack with one of your units and then cast a spell with your sorcerer afterwards, or you could do it in the opposite order. Really, all that matters is that you're using the amount of resources that you have and not overspending, but the order in which you're going to cast them is totally up to you. In sorcery, there is only 1 card with what we would classify as an instant speed, which would be dodge roll, so you don't have to worry about your opponent casting spells on your turn. Following the main phase, we then transition to the end phase. The end phase is the last phase that you complete during your turn. Here is where you would trigger abilities that happen at the end of the turn. You would remove all damage from your minions and artifacts in the realm. Then effects that last for your turn now end. Finally, your turn is over at the end of that. It's important to note that damage to your avatar is persistent. It doesn't regenerate at the end of the turn, but damage to any minions would. Say you have this sandworm. the sandworm took 3 damage from firebolts earlier in that turn. At the end of turn, it still had 1 remaining power. That means that it would regenerate back up to 4 power, meaning that it would be able to block or attack again next turn for the same amount of damage. Damage is not persistent, except to your life total. Once your end phase completes, you then pass the turn over to your opponent, who starts their start phase. You continue going back and forth until one player loses all of their life and gets brought down to death's door, waiting for that final death blow to be struck. For a more in-depth review of how interactions and abilities might take place during the main phase, please review page 31 of the rulebook to go over the storyline. The storyline helps to understand the sequence and order in which different actions and abilities can be resolved. We won't be going over it in detail during this video, though we will in a future one, but if you want to jump ahead and learn a little bit more, please make sure to check that out on page 31. Thanks so much for joining today. I really hope you enjoyed this rules overview. If you've liked this video, please feel free to like and then share it with a friend who might be trying to learn the game as well. If you're interested in being notified, hit that button, and we would always love if you could subscribe to see when future videos might be uploaded and going live. Really want to thank you for taking the time and look forward to seeing you in the contested realms. Please make sure to keep an eye on the channel to watch all the upcoming other rules videos that will be released soon.